now take you to the broadcast of It's Time with Rev Nathaniel W Martin. Here's Reverend Martin.
Say good afternoon, good evening, but never good night, and certainly never goodbye. May we ever be friends. I'm Rev Nathaniel W Martin, and this episode is called It's Time, and what it is time for equity, equality, justice, economic, social, and environmental among the very many types of demonstrations or manifestations of equality, that it is certainly time for that type of justice. Our marching orders come from two portions of the Bible, which resonate with me. Those are not the only two portions. Don't ever get it twisted. The Bible talks a great deal about people getting paid. But for our purposes, we're dealing with an Old Testament scripture here in Deuteronomy chapter 24, beginning at verse 14. It says simply, "Thou shalt not oppress an hired servant that is poor and needy, whether he be of thy brethren or of the strangers that are in thy land within thy gates. At their day thou shalt give them their hire. Neither shall the sun go down upon it, for they are poor, and set their heart upon it, lest they cry against thee unto the Lord, and it be sin unto thee." The long and short of this portion of scripture is that if you owe somebody some money, you ought to pay them. And if you get somebody to do some work for you, or if you're working for someone, they should pay you, and pay you promptly, and pay you when you are done working. In the Bible days, there was no 40-hour work week before you got paid. You got paid by the day. Excuse me, because you needed your money daily. Help me, somebody. And the person that you were working for had that understanding and knew that understanding, whether they honored it or not. They knew that when the day was done, that they were to put your pay in your hand. That's whether you were male or female. Notice that God says, uses a political word, oppressor. And when you deprive someone of their pay, of their funds, which they need to get an honest living, then you are oppressing them, because in that society they cannot function fully without some income. They have to be able to pay for what they have to have their needs met. They have to be able to pay. As we always say, you cannot pray at the bank. You have to go there with money if you want to get something out of there. And you cannot pay your utilities with prayer. You pray at prayer meeting, and you don't pray at the bear meeting. Old joke, folks. In the New Testament, the book of James, chapter 5 and verse 4, it says, "Behold, the hire of the laborers who have reaped down your fields, which is of you kept back by fraud, crieth. And the cries of them which have reaped are entered into the ears of the Lord of Sabaoth." Some people ask me why you keep harping on the same thing, because the same evil is abundant all throughout the land, that people are deprived of what they have honestly and lawfully labored and worked for. You've honestly worked, you've honestly toiled, you should honestly be paid. Honestly. You're not begging. You're just saying, pay me what you owe me. We didn't go a day past or a dollar past, so, hey, my work is done. The job is finished. The goods and products and services are delivered. Where is the agreed upon revenue? And if any of you have ever been in business for yourself, you know how much you can sweat ice cubes waiting on people to pay you. Well, you got to wait 30, 60, and 90 days, and some as long as 120 days before they pay you what they promised to pay you originally. You got to send them an invoice, and then you got to sweat, hoping that they're going to honor it. Sure, it's nice when that check finally get there, too, because you got bills to pay. Help me, somebody. Therefore, you can automatically and quickly make the application all across the social spectrum that in our interactions one with another, we ought to treat each other with respect and dignity and honesty and righteousness and be just in our dealing. Hey, it may sound childish or boyish, but that makes for a better society when we treat each other right. And especially when you're dealing with these huge corporations, these multinationals. You would try to call them on the phone, and you get lost in a maze of your call is important to you, please press 1, and you get kicked out, and you got to call back and all this type of thing. You're trying to transact your business, you know who you are, but you keep running up against these bots or these recordings that now more and more have become the face of the corporation. Isn't that right? And so it's important that the people on the other end of those various recordings retain their humanity. It's not in vain that the Bible calls these corporations beasts, because that's what they act like, beasts. And they're impersonal, and they don't want to interact with the public. Less and less. It's more and more going to this computer generated responses on voice calls and all that type of thing. And it's creating a more of a hellish society than we have had heretofore, because the poor human being who is trying to get some redress taken care of over the phone is left feeling as though nobody cares, nobody there to talk to. Wish I had a witness. Want to say a belated happy 4th of July. Hope you had a chance to enjoy your one day. God bless. You only get one day when it happens in the middle of the week. You get off on the 3rd, and you got to go right back on the 5th. That's a bummer. And so, but yet here we are on this Friday, and we are discussing so many of our great events that have flowed from the 4th of July. And I found some interesting facts about that 4th of July. And a bit later, we're going to deal with how that 4th of July applies across the board, or how it has applied and been been recognized and observed, its significance and what it means. You remember that Frederick Douglass in 1852 in Rochester, New York, was invited to speak, not on the July 4th, because that's when the white folks spoke, but on July 5th, which was the day after. But he was engaged to speak there, and he spoke on what to the slave is the 4th of July. He was the featured speaker that day, and he made one of the most memorable speeches on the 4th of July ever given. And I refer you to the history books and the encyclopedias and Google and the like to look at portion of that speech. I believe even James Earl Jones did a portion of that speech many years ago. It's a very beautiful, very cogent, very emotive. A lot of thought went into that speech, and it serves as a counterweight to the rah approach that most of us are subjected to on the 4th of July. We found out also that the 4th of July was not really the date that the Declaration of Independence was signed. Of course, John Adams says that it was July 2nd was going to be the day that the the Declaration of Independence was signed, and he had the nerve to say that what Thomas Jefferson wrote was merely a ceremonial afterthought. And we've come to find out that the deliberations in that Congress had been going on from the month of May. And actually, the first declaration had been issued on the 15th of May. But that's getting into the weeds a little bit. And not only were they working in Philadelphia, but also that George Washington had put forth his effort to make a Declaration of Independence. Strange, isn't it? And his actual declaration on July 2nd was that he didn't know what they were doing in Philadelphia. And this is his general orders. The time is now at hand which must probably determine whether Americans are to be free men or slaves. George. Remember, George was a slaveholder. Whether they are to have any property they can call their own. And remember, their property also included human beings, slaves. Whether their houses and farms are to be pillaged and destroyed, and they consigned to a state of wretchedness from which no human efforts will probably deliver them. The fate of the unborn millions will now depend upon the conduct of this army. And let us therefore go and encourage each other, and to show the whole world that a free man contending for liberty on his own ground is superior to any slavish mercenary on earth. That was George Washington. That was his own Declaration of Independence that he issued as a general order on July 2nd. Isn't that a good fact? And people didn't really celebrate what the Congress had accomplished until the word got around, which had been around July 8th. So they're saying, then some others say that there was no celebration. George Washington's army didn't hear about it until the 9th. That's when they celebrated. And Georgia didn't get the word until late in the month of August 10th. And the British in London found out about it on August 30th. So that is some of the history about the Declaration, signing a Declaration of Independence, and why we celebrate the 4th of July. And I bring all of that up because, we hold these truths to be self-evident according to our papers, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, and among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That's the natural law stated in the Declaration of Independence. And that is what the Civil War was fought over. And we have a very, very interesting history in this country. Talk about the haves of the have-nots, haves and the have-nots, which is a TV show now. But we have always had a tension and a conflict between the poor classes, the poor and the rich. And it was the rich who enslaved the Africans that were kidnapped from their homeland and forced, mind you, forced. We did not immigrate to America. As Malcolm X said, we did not land at Plymouth Rock. Plymouth Rock landed on us. And we were stripped and ripped of our culture, stripped of our religion, stripped of our identity, stripped of our language. And we couldn't get a letter from home. because we didn't know where home was. And that, my friends, is a part of American history that they would rather you not remember, or they would rather it not be included in the history book. The current outcry, hue and cry being raised about the families of the immigrants who are coming across the border, being separated, parents are being separated from their children, and what a horrible development or event that is, what a horrible activity to take children away from their parents. It flashes back to slavery when families were separated and sold off, never to see one another again. And when I hear the politicians say that this is not us, this is not the American way, and one looks at the history book and sees how not only how they did the poor African slave, but what they did to the American, so-called American Indian here, especially here in California, where they set up missions and they killed off the mother and killed off the fathers, and or else they just snatched the Indian children away from their parents and put them on these missions and forbade them to speak their native language and stripped them of all of their culture and made them dress like Westerners and Europeans and speak English and the like. And one could look rather askance or quizzically at those who say that separating children from their families is not the American way, when that was the practice, the common SOP all across the South, all across the West, includes California, please. Don't forget the Trail of Tears, Wounded Knee, and the like. All of these are part of what Donald Trump says makes America great, and he's attempting to make America great again. And so these preliminary thoughts come before us as we reflect upon the 4th of July just passed, and reflect upon where we have come and what we have got to do, and how we are going to labor to keep bad history from repeating itself. One of the big problems with this nation is they don't want to recognize the totality of their history. You want to have what you call cognitive dissonance, selective perception. You want to remember what you want to remember and say that everything is all right. Go back to the good old days. As Mars Maley said, what good old days? All right. Now, we may not always agree upon the importance of these various dates that we celebrate in the United States of America, and indeed some dates that we celebrate in the world. For my mind, and if you were alive on January 1, 1863, and the clock tolled midnight and the new day began, then if you had been Frederick Douglass or a Sojourner Truth, indeed they were free, but their millions of their brothers and sisters were still in slavery. And even though the Civil War had begun, they were still in slavery. And but thank God that Abraham Lincoln stuck to his guns, and he actually signed later on that day the the Emancipation Proclamation under the authority vested in him as the President of the United States and Commander of the Armies and the Navies in a time of actual rebellion against that authority and against that government. And he declared that the slaves being held in those states that were in open rebellion against the government of the United States would, from that point and thenceforth and forever, be free. and he asked that they refrain from violence and that they would work with their hands to earn their living in such a way as they could, and those that were fit and able would be accepted into the military service of the United States of America, our one common country. And so January 1, 1863 was a very, very important date for liberty, for freedom, for union. As Daniel Webster said, union one and inseparable now and forever. And we have been laboring to make that union more true, more vital, and ever since. And we still haven't gotten the job done. We still have too many failures, too many spaces and places where we fail and fall down. We still don't have an anti-lynching law. Can you imagine that? They've been lynching Negroes since when? And here it is, 2018, and we still lack a lynching law. I believe Kamala Harris and two other congresspeople or senators there in Washington are introducing another anti-lynching bill. That have been up until 1938. There had been 200 anti-lynching bills introduced into the Congress, and not a one of them has ever passed. And here we are in 2018, and we still do not have an anti-lynching bill in the greatest country on the face of the earth. And so, my friends, these thoughts also come before us as we celebrate the 4th of July, as we remember freedom, the ringing of the bells, and the bombs bursting in air, as they said in 1812, that we still have a long way to go. We got to get pay equity. There's been a huge wealth gap that has been engendered in this country, and it's yawning at the feet of the poor now. And there's no doubt about it. This business about if you work hard, you're gonna get ahead. You know that's bogus. Could call it something else, but it really is. It's just a lie. Because just hard work alone, if that was the case, then every slave, when slavery ended, would have been rich. And they wasn't rich when they went into slavery, and they wasn't rich while they were in slavery. And the people made definitely sure that they're going to be poor when they come out of slavery. As a matter of fact, it was, I don't want to give him the wrong rank, Oliver Howard, who, along with William Tecumseh Sherman, began to parcel out portions of captured Confederate lands and plantations to the slaves, promising them 40 acres and a mule. And what happened with that? Where is it at? As Oscar Brown said, I'm waiting on my 40 acres and my mule. And we come find out historically that after the Civil War ended, the same people who had started the war and had fought so treasonously and treacherously against the very government that gave them life after the war ended, they were welcomed back into the bosom of the government being anxious to put the war behind them and to restore the full functioning of the Union. And what the Southerners, Confederate Southerners, were not able to do, win on the battlefield with the sword and the cannon. Gotcha. they were able to subsequently return to the Congress of the United States of America. I said they returned to the Congress, same Congress that they had walked out on. And when they came back to the Congress, they were able to regain their citizenship by taking loyalty oaths. And you can take it for what it's worth. And then they promptly began to demand that their lands be returned unto them. Well, under Reconstruction, it looked as though the United States of America was going to really hold out and hold up for the principle of we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. And if America had been truthful then, we wouldn't be where we are now. But if it's a supposition, and it's a huge question. And it was easier for the Northerners to collaborate and with the Southerners, and in reconciliation, they gave the Southerners back their lands, and which pushed the former slaves out, made them landless in many portions of this country, many portions across the South. And of course, with the rise of the Ku Klux Klan here in California and up in Indiana and all across the South, after 1877, a reign of terror descended upon the descendants of the slaves, the now former slaves, will now find themselves unemployed, uneducated, with no land, no credit, and nowhere to stay. And what were they to do? Therefore, they had to turn around and go right back to work on the same plantations that they had just been freed from. And they had to trust the mercies of these Confederate soldiers, these rabid secessionists who had been defeated in war, but now had a chance to take out their revenge on the former enslaved. And you have the history before you of what happened. Because when I was born in 1947, as a result of what had transpired since 1877, colored and white water fountain, colored and white restroom, colored and white cemeteries, colored and white schools, colored and white neighborhoods, that was the norm across all 11 states that formed the Confederacy. And you had to go north in order to breathe some unsegregated air. And so as we come to a close on today, these are reflections of an old man on our history and legacy from 1776, actually before 1776, because first slaves were brought here in 1619. My brothers and my sisters, I say unto you again, we need reparations from slavery. We need reparations from the redlining that occurred and from the segregation that occurred. And as we wrap up today, as we always say, hey, if they don't pay you, don't work for them. God bless you and may God keep you is our constant prayer and our constant hope. And we hope to see you again on next week. It might not be so glum, and we may not be quite as moody. But thanks be to God that we are where we are. Hey, as they say, the day you got born again, that's an important day too. God bless you. May God keep you is our constant prayer.